name is Becky Robinson, and I'm so thrilled to be here today with Peter Block and Margie Spinney, and we are awaiting the arrival of John McKnight. So as you're arriving today, we want to get you a little bit acquainted with the technical aspects of today's presentation. First of all, you'll want to know that we are recording this session live. So if we have an interesting conversation, which we will, and you want to share it with others, you will be able to share the recording with your friends and colleagues after the conclusion of today's event. The first thing that I wanted to do is alert you to the chat panel. We will use the chat panel throughout today's presentation, and we welcome your engagement and participation there. So why don't you take a quick moment and find the chat, and what I'd like you to do is use the drop-down menu to select all panelists and attendees. Then everyone can know who you are and engage with your comments throughout today's broadcast. So if you are able to find the chat and if you are able to select all panelists and attendees, why don't you tell us where you're calling in from today? We always love to hear that. And also maybe tell us why it's important for you to be here today. And we would love to hear from you. So again, welcome to the Abundant Community with Peter Block and Margie Spinney as our special guest, and we expect to welcome John McKnight shortly. As we're waiting, I want to let you know that our next conversation is going to be happening on June 18th, and we will have special guest Mike Mather with us, and he will be speaking about Having Nothing, Possessing Everything, his new book. So welcome to Dave in Portland, Oregon, to Gordon in Bermuda, to Barbara in Columbus, Ohio, to Derek in Lidgerwood, North Dakota, and to Ellen. Looks like we have some folks in Kentucky. So welcome, and welcome to John McKnight. Hi, John, you made it.
Yes.
It's great to see you. So I'm going to turn this conversation over to Peter and Margie and John. And Peter, I believe you're going to introduce Margie. And then later on in the call, please share your chat questions and comments, and we may have some of you on camera with us for some discussion later on in today's event.
That's great. Anyway, thank you, Becky and Margie. Thank you so much for coming, John. Good to see you. So let me say a couple things about why this conversation is important and why Margie is such a radical, practical person. There's a huge conversation in any community about housing. There's a huge conversation about what to do about poverty. There's a huge conversation about the impact and effectiveness of social services. And the bottom line in my mind is we've been having those conversations for 20, 30, 40 years. And if you're anything like Cincinnati, you know, all the dominant measures of well-being seems like we're doing well. And yet we've got a huge number of people that struggle. We have high eviction rates. So if you look at the people that the tide was supposed to rise, it didn't. And so you ask yourself, well, is there anything unique or anything new or anything worth focusing on that will confront the housing situation? And Margie, probably 15 years ago, I don't know how long ago, Margie, decided that she was going to find a way to do wealth creation for low-income people. Wealth creation for low-income people. And that's quite a sentence, because most of us think low-income people need to be fixed. They're the target of the $1 billion in social services in Cincinnati right now. And we think they need job training. We think they need free coins for transportation. We think they need special kind of coaching, counseling services. All of those are useful, but they're like triage. And my thought is most social services we run across, it's like getting a new ambulance, but it doesn't stop the war. Margie's found a way to stop the war. She's invited low-income people into housing that she controls and acts as landlord for. And then by engaging them as partners in the well-being of that structure, Margie, you can correct me later if I got this wrong, but by engaging them, they stay longer, they take care of the place, they take care of each other. And at the end of 5 years, and I don't know what the numbers are now, Margie, but they've saved enough for the owner of the building. They now have access to $5,000 of wealth that they can use any way they want. It's not a funder saying you can use the money, but it's got to be for education, it's got to be for healthcare. They now are creating wealth as low-income people without any increase, simply by the way they inhabit together the building in which they live. And to me, that if you're looking for social innovations, I do not understand why every housing situation in this city isn't doing what Margery calls rental partnerships. And so I think I'm just so happy to have you as a neighbor, Margery, and so happy that this thing has been invented in Cincinnati. And if I've exaggerated at all, you don't have to correct me, okay? But what I'd like to start with is first welcome you and thank you.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about some origin story. What's your creation story of how you came up with this? And then if you want to describe what this is now, I may be a little out of date, you can do that. But talk to us a little bit about how this got created and what the trail of this looks like and what got you into it.
Okay. I want to go back to the 1990s. And in about 1996, I took over management of a community loan fund in Cincinnati that had a lot of investment from socially conscious individuals. They had put money in a common fund, and churches were involved, religious orders, but it wasn't by the banks, it was by people who cared, and they were funding nonprofit housing development. And so I knew they really cared more about the people that were living in the housing than the housing development itself. But in analyzing what was happening to the people whom I would go out and talk to and meet and so on, I learned from them that they weren't really that much better off, that they were still unable to buy a home and to build any equity. They were fearful that they might have to move if prices in the neighborhood started going up. They didn't have a great sense of community because there's a lot of issues in affordable housing and nothing to really kind of bring people together. And so, but largely I was concerned about the wealth inequality and the fact that low-income people are renters and they don't have any way to build equity in the way that helps them, get anywhere, get to a better place in their life. Even when income goes up, because they're already living hand to mouth, or oftentimes they just have to buy something else that they need, and it doesn't help them build wealth because they don't have that discretionary income. So my idea was to create an alternative to the American dream of homeownership that would, as you said, give people living in their housing that need to rent a way to contribute something of value to how that housing operates that would actually generate money that would come back to them. So I did that in partnership with the Franciscan Friars in Cincinnati in the first development, and with another nonprofit. And then we developed a third project between 2000 and 2012. We had an independent evaluation that was highly successful. The residents had built over about $140,000 in financial savings over time. And they had done that when people who were buying housing crashed in 2008 and lost a lot of their equity. And yet our residents were able to continue to build wealth and to build a very strong community among each other. So I left there in 2012 and went on to start running partnerships because there were a few things that need to be addressed that we couldn't address it without housing in the way it was financed and owned. And one of them is, I think, permanent ownership of affordable housing is critical. People have to feel that they can stay where they're living indefinitely, and they're not going to have to fear that the rent's going to go up or the building is going to be sold because the neighborhood's getting more valuable. So I think the key parts for me are to what we do are the permanent affordability, the fact that residents really contribute and are able to add value, and that it actually receives an economic return, and that they build community by working together toward common goals.
You know, let me just stop for a second.
Yeah.
I think what's so powerful is you've made a direct relationship between building community, social capital within a building, and economic growth and well-being and asset development.
Yes.
That bridge is pretty unique and amazing.
Yeah, I think I look at the economics system as a community. It's a big community. And some people are in and some people are out of that community. So the in people are the people who own everything. And I think that is, you're really underlying all of the a lot of the economic issues we have now, the growing wealth inequality and the just inability for people to control a lot of their own lives.
You know, it's hard to sell the idea that resident behavior, community, going to a meeting once a week, taking care of a piece of it, help select the next, was what was essential to your success up until 2012.
I'm going to share a slide with you because this is a very simple way of explaining it.
Good.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to go there, and I share. Okay, so in this slide, what we're asking ourselves here is, what is it that residents can do? What contributions can residents really make to operating housing that generates financial wealth? And I argue that because they make this contribution, they deserve the wealth that is created. So in managing rental housing for quite a long time, the primary things that residents can do is to reduce the turnover in that housing. Because every time you turn over an apartment, you have to repaint it, fix it up again. You have to have, most property managers' time is all spent getting new residents, going out and marketing. And so if we have a community where people are committed to stay together and to participate in budgeting for the housing and to make sure that we stay within the budget and that people are happy being there so they don't want to leave, it's amazing how much money you save. So in the way we actually budget for the housing, we put aside a reserve every month that would normally be going to vacancy and turnover, and if it didn't, it goes in the owner's pocket. In our case, we put it into a reserve fund, and then we have a certain measurements that each resident is able to build a share of credits in that fund that we build.
That's great. I was rereading the study done by an independent group in Ohio, and it's like without your rental housing, the painting costs were 7 times. You know, there's just enormous amount of money. And the other is the emotional crisis of having to move. If you look at why low-income people's children don't do well in school, one of the big reasons is because they're going to a different school every 4 months.
That's really true.
Ooh.
It's really true. And in trying to build a community where people know each other and care about each other, it's hard to do that when you're afraid that you're going to have to leave at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Margery,
So what we're trying to do now, we have continued to do this after I left and started renting partnerships. We leased a duplex and have been working with those residents, and we're now looking for funds, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, to do more of this housing outside of government programs. And I think that's possible. I think for it to be scalable, we have to go to another way of financing housing.
Well,
But
go ahead.
well, I wanted to just, I think, say a couple things, and I don't want to going back and forth to slides because I think it's confusing. But our model for housing, Peter, we now call it dividend housing.
Oops, I'm out of date.
Yep.
It's not rental partnerships anymore?
Well, our organization is rental partnerships, but the housing itself is called dividend housing.
Okay, thank you.
And the
I'll
reason
tell my people.
now, people receive dividends in a lot of different ways, but the residents are in a way receiving dividends. And one of the reasons we wanted to call it something like that is because if you're going to buy a home, you say, I want to be a homeowner, or I live in my own home, or you say, I rent. Well, we want people to say, I want to choose dividend housing. So we want something that is that can become known as its own thing. And that has a certain meaning to it that is agreed upon.
So it's a third pillar in the house.
It's a third pillar. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to go to a slide now, and I want to show you what that pillar looks like. So I'm going to share, but I want to go forward in the slides. Let's see, how do I do that? We practiced.
Just say, Siri, go forward.
Yeah, right. Okay, now you can see that slide.
Yes, we can. Looks great.
Okay, so we want to put a contrast here. What's different about dividend housing than owning and leasing? So in dividend housing, I am not the landlord. It's supposed to remain permanently affordable and go beyond me. So we have a nonprofit organization that owns it, and it owns it in a kind of a trust, similar in a way to a land trust, but it owns the building entirely. And so the residents are essentially subleasing from a nonprofit, which they are also part of. But the reason for that is so that the housing stays permanently affordable, and nobody has to buy anything to get in, nobody has to come up with a down payment, and they don't have to sell their unit when they leave. You get in it very much like you do renting. You have a lease, but it also has a legal contract in the lease that guarantees the rights to these renter credits or financial credits.
Equity credits, right?
Equity credits. And so normally, if you own your own house, you can do anything you want in terms of how you take care of it, and what you have to do in terms of how you treat your neighbors. In renting, you really don't have any control. The landlord makes those decisions. And in dividend housing, every resident is a part of the resident association, and they have a vote. We make decisions by consensus on a set of policies that everybody agrees to operate by.
If you have a problem resident, can they be asked to leave for good cause?
Yes, which is actually, in a way, it's an advantage of dividend housing over, let's say, a condo.
Right.
Right? Because we have a set of policies that everybody's agreed to. It's adopted by the resident association. And when somebody is in violation of those policies, we have a process that they go through of talking to someone, whoever might have been hurt by their behavior or whatever. And, there's a 3-step process where we try to work it out. But if we can't, then they can be evicted.
So because if you're renting, usually if there's problems in your building or next close, you go to the police to come with you to tell these people to stop doing bad things.
Right, you don't really have any control, and if the landlord doesn't come out, if you complain that somebody's in the building that shouldn't be there, there isn't really much you can do about it.
Right, and half the landlords live in another city.
Right.
You know.
So in a situation we've had, you know, that kind of thing, so I say, well, the manager really can't do much about it because we're not there. So it's up to you guys. How are we going to address that problem? And they'll sit down and in a meeting and figure out, well, maybe so and so will take turns making sure the doors are, you know, locked in the evening.
That's great. There's a question here, Margie, and then John had a question. Dave Cresta says, is it fair to say that dividend housing is a form of community land trust but adapted to multifamily housing?
Yes.
Good. Thanks, Dave.
I think that's pretty fair.
Okay. John, did you have a question?
Well, I was sort of interested in some of the social aspects of what's going on. You have a...
Let us come back to you, Margie.
Okay.
That's a great slide. It's so clear.
Yeah. You have a residents association, and I think there's some indication that maybe people have to go or are obligated or make a commitment to go. I'm just wondering if you could describe the nature of the decision making that the residents are engaged in, some examples. How do they take their serious role of being sort of co-managers in this?
Yes, that's a good question. But one thing we do is we advertise dividend housing as a choice and market it that way. And so when people, we do a orientation before people move in. They attend meetings and they get a good understanding of what this involves. So they're not moving in as renters and then being told, okay, well, this is what you have to do. They've chosen to live here and they said, this is what we want to do. And they understand we've been through all the legal agreements and that kind of thing. So they're coming in knowing what they're doing. One of the first things they do while we're developing a property is develop the community, and we do that largely by working on the house rules and the operating policies. And so they will establish and determine whether there's going to be pets and what you do if somebody violates, you know, the curfew and blah, 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 those kinds of things.
Drugs.
And so if we have a disagreement, we often break down into smaller groups and people will come up with their own solutions. Each group will, yeah, Peter, your approach, they'll come up with their solution for their group and they'll share. And we often come up with very creative ideas about how we're going to solve that. We don't air grievances there. It's a matter of creating policies. The resident community's job is to create the policy.
That's great.
Another thing I was wondering about is you have also developed a loan fund.
Yeah.
And that loan fund is recognizing that even though you've given a wonderful economic opportunity in dividend housing, people still live largely on the margin. And they're one check, if they get a check, right, away from bankruptcy.
Right.
Seen it over and over again. So that what usually happens is people go to payday loan kinds of places where they are hijacked at a ransom amount of money to borrow very little. But you now have an alternative that really impressed me in your loan fund. Can you tell us about it?
Well, yes. As I said, I started out operating a community loan fund. So we started using funds in that fund to help residents when they come into a tight situation, which happens a few times a year for a lot of people. And they can, essentially, it's like forbearance on their rent. You know, they can use the money they would pay for rent for whatever their emergency is, and then we work out a situation where they can pay that back. They work out how we're going to pay it back, whether it's over a couple of years, a little bit a month, or it's when they get their check or when they get back to work, however they want to do it. And that's been very effective. I think when we don't have a loan fund, the way to do that same thing is just through the rent forbearance. Once people have been there 5 years, they have their own access to their credits to use, and that is one of the primary ways that they use them. I wanted to add to what Peter had said, that the credits are, the schedule for credits builds to $10,000 in 10 years. How much a family earns in that time really depends on how strict they are about fulfilling each of the monthly obligations. If they miss a month, they just keep building, but they won't have quite as much when they're done. And they can renew that. So if we have permanently affordable housing, they continue to build the equity credits after the 10 years. Their first contract expires, they can stay there, they can renew their contract and build for another 10 years and another 10 years. They could live there their whole lives and essentially keep building financial equity for as long as they live there. So they can build equivalent to what they would have if they'd been able to buy a house.
Wow. Is there, now this is a common land trust. This land and buildings are going to appreciate over time. Is there any way the Dividend housing can capture and make use of some of that appreciation?
No.
So it really is like a nature conservancy. Once you put your money in here, now do the investors, do the sources of capital for the common land have any return at all?
Yes. Now, I want to skip to that because that's the next kind of community we need to build. You had said, why isn't every owner doing this? And why isn't this being done, since it could be? And it isn't being done because our financial system is geared to buying and selling property. And we really don't have a financial system that supports permanent affordability. So the idea is you get appreciation, you sell it, and you get some money out of it, and that's what the system is built to do. We're trying to build a system that essentially removes the housing from the market so it stays permanently affordable. It doesn't lose quality. We want to keep the quality high, but we want to use it as a means for the residents to build wealth, so we're not going to sell it. What we need to find is to find a way to finance that housing, and that's what we've been working on for the last 3 years. And essentially what we're doing is creating, our goal is to create another community loan fund where the community of people who have wealth and can give us $10,000 for 10 years, right, or more, will invest in Dividend housing, and we will pay them a return of 2 to 3% on the, out of the rent. But because they're investing, we don't ever have to sell the housing to give the principal back. What will happen is, this is the goal, we have like a mutual fund where someone else comes in and invests and takes them out. So we have a continual source of flow of funds coming in to develop housing that's affordable and that builds wealth for low-income people.
That's amazing. So, and 2 to 3% is as much or more than I can get by putting it in the bank.
Right. So where we are now,
I've got passive money sitting around. All right.
Right. We got our first 20,000 investment. We got our first 20,000 investment. Actually, we have 25 now in this fund, which is Renting Partnerships Fund, about a week ago. And we are working on financing 4 units. So we're building, we have a plan, to continue to grow this and to work with affiliates to grow it in other areas. But I think where we are right now is we have to demonstrate again that this model works and that residents or investors really are willing to invest in a share, invest money.
Yeah, you've had a lot of experience with investors. For people who are listening, maybe, where do you look? What, what are the characteristics of people who will invest in this kind of thing? Do you have a...
Well, I have met people who have said to me when I explain what we're trying to do, well, good, you've given us a way we can do something about what's going on in the world. Because they hear an awful lot about, and they feel bad, you know, that people are hurting, that they know that we have this wealth divide and growing just separation of community and you know, demand for social services that we can't meet, and they want to do something. So this is a way they can do something. And I think it's through the faith community primarily that feeling is, you know, that feeling is there, not any particular community, but I think that that's a feeling of spirituality, that we're all connected and that we can't just take care of ourselves and not worry about anybody else. And what we're showing here is that you can make it work for everybody. So you know, if I were to summarize today, what I wanted to say today is that we're building communities not just of residents and building wealth just for residents, but for people who invest in this fund, we're building a connection between them and people they never see.
Great.
And might want to see and want to know, but they don't have a way to do it. And they are really making a difference in the lives of people. That is, we don't have time to go into it, but the financial impact of investing $10,000 for 10 years in this is much greater. I mean, it's exponentially grows. If people in this country were to be doing this, we would have millions and millions of dollars of wealth being developed at the lower end of the economic system.
See, also what strikes me is that people are very generous and they give a lot of money without any expected return. You know, Greater Cincinnati Foundation, I don't know how many millions and millions of dollars are sitting there with no expectation of return and no ability to recycle their money. So this is an amazing value proposition, that instead of giving your money away, okay, now they get a tax deduction. I don't know if they get any tax benefit from you, okay, but I'm just saying, what an alternative. I can park my money for 10 years and then get it back in case my mind changes or generationally people change. Right. And I get out of property as being the major generation of wealth, which means I stop displacing people all the time.
Right.
The current system, the private developer is pressured to create affordable housing. And they do it, you know, but then people get moved out because there's no housing stability in low income, moderate income. So it just seems so many aspects of this. And if the city can get $34 million for a soccer stadium, why can't they send a check to Margery? That's what I want to know.
Well, and the other thing we do that the affordable housing developers don't do is we give the development decisions back to the community, because we're doing small projects. We're doing a duplex or a fourplex or a few units at a time. A church could come together and say, okay, we're going to invest in this, you know, 4-family, and we're going to you know, partner with those residents in lots of different ways. And you can't do that if your primary goal is to develop affordable housing, because the way it's financed incentivizes doing 70, 80, 100 units at a time. It isn't the same kind of community. It's hard to build community that way.
When you put 80 units in one place, you create a mass of material that changes the nature of that community. It denies all history of that community.
Right.
It has amnesia about what might have grown and built and been felt there. And it's just so different than the traditional. And when you said our traditional wealth creation is buying and selling property, This is why African Americans' wealth in 15 years is going to go to zero, because
Yes, you're right.
it's excluded from buying property. And what you're doing here is letting a communal housing generate wealth in a way other than, and so to me, it's a form of reparation. You say, how do we pay back people that have been redlined out of the post-war wealth accumulation by design? All right, and we have the Community Reinvestment Act that banks are supposed to do, but mostly they're building 100-unit buildings with their, and so I just, as a form of reparations, which I hadn't thought before, that's another way to frame what you're.
It can be framed that way, although it isn't out of a sense of guilt. It's out of building a healthy community where everyone is included.
I don't know, but the reparations doesn't have to be about guilt. It's about money due.
Yeah.
It's about a future we can create together.
I have thought that that's true.
Margery, let me ask you about another thing that there's an evaluation on our site that people ought to read of how things were in the beginning of your activity. And the thing that interested me especially was that they asked each of the residents, what is the single most important thing for you about being here in this place? And the top answer, a third of the people said that it was the sense of community was the most important thing. And not, for instance, that they were building equity.
Yeah.
That. But the first thing they say is this: it's building the sense of community that we have. And I wonder if you could comment, everybody we talk to is trying to enhance, build, support community. And here, by resident evaluation, even though you're coming at it from a financial aspect, say the most important thing is the social relations in the community that I feel is here. How's that happen?
I think that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I think that community is built around common interests. So you build a community around your school and your kids' playmates, and you build community around your church, or you like to play tennis or fish. In this case, we're building community around the idea that we want to live in a place that is safe and attractive, and where people respect each other and are neighborly and friendly. And so that's the commonality. And the intent is that people want to live there forever. And what I saw happen, what was really beautiful over the time we've been doing this, is that people start out distrusting everybody else because that's the world they've lived in. And they'll, be somebody who's cranky all the time because that's their personality, And over time, because they stay there a while, they get to know, okay, well, that's just so-and-so and how she is, but her heart is still in, a good person. So, we had just so many instances. It was just, my partner, Carol Smith, and I would go to work every day just feeling great, because we could see this happening, and people just caring, like if they wanted to water flowers, they could get out there and water flowers and dig in the dirt, and they could choose to do that. Whereas then other people will want to do it with them because they like to do that. Carol tells this story about how the first year every year we do like a spring cleanup, and we would plant flowers and make the gardens look nice outside. And the community room, we had a community room and a kitchen. And the first year, everybody wanted to help clean the community room and the halls and the kitchen because that's what they knew how to do. And they didn't feel comfortable digging in dirt. But every year, more and more people would decide they wanted to come outside and enjoy the fresh air and and planting the flowers and being able to see them. And so eventually Carol had nobody working with her in the kitchen, and they were all outside with me.
Now, do people have their own apartments and there's a community room and kitchen?
Yes.
So it's a little bit like pocket housing, right?
Yeah, there's a design, there's a lot of nuance to this, and part of it is the community design. There should be a sense of place, you know,
gotcha. And a sense of commonplace. You know,
one time we had wanted to decide what to do with the interior of the buildings off the street. And we had a landscape designer come out and talk to the residents about what they wanted, and they said they wanted to be able to barbecue, you know, and you know, in the city, everybody sits out on the sidewalk and does that because they don't have any place to go. So he helped us design space, and we got a grant, and we built picnic tables, and the residents planted the trees, and we ended up with a park.
So let me stop for a second. Becky, you might invite people if they have questions, or if somebody's willing to come on. Let's do that now.
We actually do have Raymond who's ready to come on, so I'm going to prepare to invite Raymond to join us in just a second. We did have a couple of others and some other questions in the chat.
Okay, if anybody wants to raise their hand, they can either come on or chat. I got it. You know, the other thing, Margie, what's so powerful about this is you're really shifting from a property-based economy to a relationship-based economy. Because the whole modernism and the began with enclosure, when in England, what was common land was taken for private ownership, fencing, because it was more profitable to have sheep than people.
Yeah,
To me, this is kind of going back in the direction of the common land, the common good, disproving the tragedy of the commons.
Yeah.
All right, Raymond, thank you.
Welcome, Raymond.
Hi, thanks very much.
You look like you're in a workplace.
I am. So I'm at Spinney University. You can see everybody behind me here.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Eric, hi. Where are you?
I just had a quick question about.
Is your cell phone on?
No, there we go. Just about permanent affordability and whether that means the same thing as rent not going up, and if rent does go up, how is that calculated?
Rent goes up because it needs to. So if costs go up, the rent goes up. The residents participate in the budget and they know why it goes up. It just doesn't arbitrarily go up. Okay. The costs do go up over time. Water and sewer, in Cincinnati, it's the sewer rates. But then they have to go up. But our goal now, what I didn't get into was the financing at this 2 or 3% and the difference that makes. If we finance a building at 2% and it's $100,000, we're paying $2,000 a year towards that, having that building. If the normal investor might want 10%, and so you're paying $10,000 a year. So we're saving that $8,000 a year that would be going into financing. And that's why we need this fund, because it allows us to keep the rents about $400 or $500 below market rate without having to go to a government program to do it.
Hey.
Who's your group, Raymond?
Introduce the group.
Or just what do you gathered for? Is this
University, and we're excited to be hopefully spreading Margie's model out in suburban Philadelphia.
Where in Philadelphia?
Norristown.
Oh, I know that. That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, Eric and I have been communicating quite frequently, and he's a professor of business and has helped us develop our business plan.
All right, thank you so much. Becky, anybody else?
Yeah. So far, no one else. However, what we can do is I can read some of the questions. We have a few folks that are running around multitasking and not able to join on camera. I do have some comments here from David. if you just give me a quick moment. So David said, having worked in the community empowerment areas within metropolitan public housing communities in Canada for over 2 decades and having lived in Philadelphia for the last decade, I'm still finding that the realities between these two nations are so different. Having said that, I applaud Ms. Spinney's accomplishments. It must have been a long and depressing journey to get this done to this level. But he's curious, how can we talk about ownership, financial security of anything in the US when that can be taken away with one health emergency? And is there a plan to coordinate this effort with other empowerment sectors? It's a really big question.
That's a really
beautiful question.
Well, I think the thing that jumps out at me is the question about stability. You know, that the fear that you'll lose your home because you don't have you have a health emergency, or you'll lose your home because you've gotten older, and so keeping the housing permanently affordable contributes to that. Building a nest egg through renting partnerships and Dividend housing and staying there for a long time contributes to that. We have had people, one in particular I can speak to, that had, she was legally blind, and she used her equity that she built after 5 years to do the copay she needed in order to get an operation and help get her sight back. So it does help. It doesn't do everything, because he's right. We do have other issues. This is only one of.
You know,
Margery,
Yeah.
I think that the question is, what about all of the other resources that might help? But you're focusing on the two aspects of life that produce more health, more well-being than anything else.
That's
and they
true.
are community and income. So you're at the heart of the matter. All the other things, I think, are really secondary. So you are an answer to health problems and education problems. And I think it's good that you are focused where you are, because what you're getting is multiple effects. You're
That's
getting
true.
lots of outcomes for a minimum of income.
Yeah.
Inputs, yeah.
I think you're right about that, and I have seen the studies that show that the stress of living in the urban environments the way they are is one of the biggest contributions to health problems.
Thanks so much.
I want to add one other thing. The stability question, the fact that you're getting people, you have, in a sense, an incentive to stay in this place. And most of the people I've been associated with over the years are neighborhood organizers. And the greatest deterrent to an effective neighborhood organization is the mobility of the people in the neighborhood, the high turnover rates.
Yeah.
So that your work as well of stabilizing and giving continuity to residents is absolutely vital to creating the neighborhood relationships that then can become powerful on other kinds of goals and issues. So congratulations for that too.
Yeah, that's really true. We organized our residents to go to the community council meetings, and they were the ones that could make decisions because they were there. And they were staying there, and they could go and protest, let's say, a drug issue or a issue of somebody doing something unhealthy or bad in the community. Because
David says, I wonder if the American dream of private housing is no longer attainable. And even the phrasing, was that the American dream? I think that's a consumerist dream, all right, that I have to own something as a measure of my well-being, as a measure of my accomplishment. I think we're in a time now where they say the middle class is softening a little bit, the rust and this and that, and bring the jobs back, but they cost more than they deliver. And this is a real alternative for that. Say, stop that framework that you measure economic wealth by housing starts. And you're
Yeah.
opening a world, say the measurements is what's killing us.
Well,
Change.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I would never be done.
Well, the fact that more people are choosing to rent now that can afford to buy is also putting pressure on the cost of housing in the city, in the urban areas where lower income people are living, and creating a rise in rents and displacement, and we call it gentrification. So it goes, it's a double-edged sword in a way. It's good that people want to move into the city and they want diverse neighborhoods, but they end up being undiverse because the people who
because it's a mindset, because the only way to make money is through your housing. And what you're substituting is private housing for housing security.
Right, and we think anybody should choose
to secure where I'm living. I don't need to own it.
And it doesn't have to be, right, dividend housing doesn't have to be one class. It's not necessarily low-income housing. It could, anybody who wants to do the responsibilities to the community and be part of that should be able to do it.
And there are other movements, co-housing movements, where people are coming together in small groups and buying something that helps raise their children and share. There's a pocket neighborhood movement. Mm-hmm. I think what you just said I hadn't thought of, but why do I keep calling it low-income housing?
Right.
Why don't we just call it dividend housing? You've given me a name.
Exactly. Thank you.
And so this is another way to manage my wealth, to provide housing security, a housing future. I can pass it on to my family, all right? But I don't have to go the ups and downs, and we won't never have a housing bubble again.
Right.
So we have a couple.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Other people want to talk. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, there's a few comments that came in that I thought were interesting. So one person was wondering about whether people who don't have $10,000 to participate or invest, if there are other ways that they can help build these communities. So we'll address that one first, and then I have several more.
Well, I think it's that we need to build the fund, and people can help by reaching out to others, helping go to a community they belong to, and getting other people involved, and helping us come out and talk to them. And I think that way is the most you could do. It doesn't. We're saying 10,000 because that's kind of a nice even number. I'm not saying that the fund has to be 10,000, but it's just.
All right, Margie.
Got it. Hopefully that's helpful.
500 is an even number also.
That's right.
So a comment from Ellen about the importance of consistent housing to keep children in the same school that helps them make progress and learn and get better jobs in the future. And Sarah's wondering what some of the responsibilities are that the residents commit to.
Well, we don't. I want to say we ask them to participate in management, but they aren't going and fixing their furnace or climbing up on the roof like they would if they were a homeowner. What their responsibilities usually are to take care of and keep in good condition an area of the property. So we would map the property out, and everybody usually has like an indoor and an outdoor responsibility. So they may take care of their hall and make sure it's always clean and nice looking. They might put pictures up and keep it, attractive. And they might make sure that they're sweeping the sidewalk out in front of their door, so that there isn't litter and they're pulling weeds and that kind of thing. But it's what we do is we kind of do a map, and then everybody decides what they want to do. If they want to clean the lint out of the washers and dryers in the laundry room, that can be their job, And usually we look for people to put in about 15 minutes a day, an hour and a half a week, maybe, in that kind of thing. The idea being that the goal is to make our property look better than anything else on the street.
Thank you.
In the evaluation, the residents said, a quarter of them said the most important thing about this place is that the living conditions are so good. This is not a communal judgment. It's a judgment of the results of this sort of co-management and these agreements.
Right. And that only happens because they do it together.
Right. That's social capital. So
Mhm.
Somebody also said this fits right into a millennial lifestyle. And I think it could be taken so many places. I think public housing, why doesn't it run on this model? And it's just a mindset that's driven by the real estate consciousness,
Right.
developer consciousness. And we have this belief that if you're not constantly building new problems, you won't have a future. I think you really are a third pillar,
Right.
from the disgrace of rental to the greed or ambition of owning. And just thank you so much. So
Thank you.
anybody else we want to?
Well, I do have a question here from Rex, and he's wondering, is there a vesting period for residents? If so, how long, and what happens to the investment if the resident leaves before fully vested?
That's a quick one. There's a 5-year vesting period, although they can take a loan before that. There's a 5-year vesting period, and I don't know if there's any more to say.
Okay, thanks. Hopefully that answers your question, Rex.
So I would like to conclude with an offer. If anybody wants to contribute to Margin and doesn't have $10,000, send it to me, and I will aggregate the money and bring it to her. And every time it hits 10,000, I'll deliver it to you, Margie. How's that? I'll be your bag.
Awesome.
Hey, man.
John,
I love it. I love it.
That's amazing.
Great. So we'll have a fund of funds.
yes.
And hopefully Leslie, who's our chat host, can make sure everybody knows how to get their money to Peter Block.
Well, I probably just did something really stupid. But
And we will give them a legal contract that they'll get their money back.
okay.
And Margery, if people who are listening want to get in touch with you, is this something that's on our website, or how can that happen?
Well, I think I can go to a slide that gives you the numbers if I go to share again.
That's perfect.
And
Why don't you do that?
And we
Dave
can
also
also make
said-
sure that that all gets in the follow-up email and
Yeah.
in the.
yeah, I know I have to be quick.
Good.
Dave Cresta says that this guerrilla development in Portland is doing innovative development with crowdsourcing. Small
Okay.
participation. Thank
So
you.
I had in my slideshow, which I did for a group called Transform Finance last week.
You did? Wow.
I told them about this webinar, and my information is at the bottom of the page.
Thank you so much for that.
And my email isn't on there, so it's spinneymargery@gmail.com.
I like this. You offer a free half-hour conversation. That's pretty cool.
That's great. Yeah.
So that's, oh, that's us. Okay, good. You got it. We delivered on that. We can best.
You did, but it was an hour.
I know. The second hour, we charge for the second hour, Margie.
Okay.
Second half hour.
Well, it's been great to talk to you, and I appreciate it. I
Thank you
hope
so
you
much.
all can keep this going.
Yeah, we will.
Your
Okay, Becky.
spirit radiates. You can just see it in what you said.
So I'm still getting questions about how to send money into Peter. Leslie will make sure that all the follow-up is included in our emails that are going to go out to all of you who are with us today. So thank you. Thank you, Peter and Margie and John. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Becky.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Margie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.